Alright, so in this book, Hannah, the main character, thinks her next door neighbor is a ghost. Her neighbor's name is Danny, and she thinks he's a ghost. So let's get all of the Danny Phantom giggles out of our system right now. Yes, we all love that early aughts animated supernatural action comedy from Nickelodeon, and it sure is humorous that both that show and this book are supernatural ghost stories involving characters named Danny. We good? Got all that worked out? Okay, let's proceed. Hannah Fairchild is having a boring summer. Her friends have all gone to summer camp, including her best friend Janie, and for all she knows, they're actually participating in a covert government exercise to see who gets to go to the next space mission. She lives in a small town without much to do. Her parents are, well, parents, and she's having as much fun as she can with her 6-year-old twin brothers, Bill and Herb. Oh, excuse me, this was published in the States. I mean Bill and Herb. She's been taking them outside in the middle of the night, setting little campfires and telling them ghost stories. Also, her house is on fire! Holy crap! Oh, phew, it was just a nightmare. Hannah is so relieved that she's not actually burning to death that she has a sunny outlook for the rest of the day. Well, I'm in a great mood today, Hannah declared, gazing out the window at a cloudless blue sky. Her mother stared at her suspiciously. How come? Hannah shrugged. I just am. She didn't feel like telling her mother about the nightmare, about how good it felt to just be alive. Should I just say it? Or pretend it's not a twist everyone guesses right away? Like, it's so obvious, guys, and that's even if you haven't actually seen the Goosebumps movie. It's weird that this book is the one Goosebumps book the film actually spoils. Anyway, we'll proceed like we don't all know what's actually going on. Hannah goes outside and runs into a pale red-headed kid named Danny. Danny says he lives next door, which is weird because Hannah's pretty sure that house was empty just yesterday. If he just moved in, why didn't she see moving trucks? Danny fails to give a clear answer, and it's weird how he seems to just vanish whenever Hannah looks away for a moment, but he seems like a nice kid, maybe a new friend to help pass the summer. After writing a letter to Janie, Hannah goes out to walk through her little Grover's Corner. Why, there's Mrs. Quilty picking weeds out in the garden again. Hello, Mrs. Quilty. Huh, she doesn't seem to have heard me. Well, over there is Mr. Harder's ice cream parlor. 1 scoop or 2. Ernie the barber is sitting over there with a magazine, waiting for a customer to come in. And over yonder is the post office. Hannah hears a yelp coming from behind and goes to check it out, finding Danny, 2 punkish kids Hannah's never seen before, a dog, and Mr. Chesney, the postmaster. The dog had its head lowered and was whimpering softly. A tall boy, thin and lanky with scraggly blonde hair, grabbed the dog gently and bent down to comfort it. Don't throw stones at my dog! The boy shouted at Mr. Chesney. Get away! Go! I warned you! Mr. Chesney snarled. You don't have a right to hurt my dog! The blonde boy insisted, still cradling the mutt. The dog's stubby tail was wagging, furiously now. The dog licked the boy's hands. This is government property, the postmaster replied sharply. I'm warning you. Get away from here. This isn't a hangout for troublemakers. I have never wanted to punch someone as much as I want to punch Chesney right now. It's a cliche, I know, but the kick the dog trope is still a very effective way to get me to hate this guy. As far as my concern for fictional characters go, he deserves everything that's going to happen to him. In fiction. Not if this was in real life. I'm not a psychopath. So Danny and his 2 friends run off. Hannah shrugs off the incident and starts making her way back home, but soon realizes she's being followed. At first she thinks it's a man in the shadows, only to realize that it's a man made of shadows. This is, initially, a solid creepy image. The threatening, following shadow figure is something that dates back to at least Nosferatu, and is still evoked in modern popular horror with figures like Slender Man and the Babadook. We are instinctively mindful of shadows and darkness as an evolutionary tactic, as shadows can be potentially hiding murderous predators. You combine that with a stranger danger element of the image of someone stalking a 12-year-old girl in a suburban environment, and you have one of the simplest but most affecting creepy images you could have in a children's horror book. Don't worry, R.L. Stine will screw it up eventually. Well, Hannah feels in danger and makes a run for it, eventually realizing the shadow form is no longer there. Thinking she must have imagined it, she brushes it off. A few days later, she sees Danny tossing a ball around in his backyard and goes out to chat with him. While conversing, she learns that Danny goes to the same school as her, and those two punkish kids he was hanging out with, Alan and Fred, are also from the same school. Which seems incredibly unlikely because Danny just moved here, right? And Hannah has never met Alan and Fred despite going to the same school and being in the same grade. Reality isn't lining up. Danny accidentally throws his ball into the gutter and tries to retrieve it with a ladder, but ends up taking a fall. Hannah can't watch, but it turns out Danny is okay. He says he landed on his feet and he's just fine. But Hannah didn't hear the sound of his landing. There's just something not right about Danny. Maybe he's a ghost. You know, a ghost with an entire ghost family and also 2 ghost friends from school and I guess a ghost dog that gets harassed by the postmaster. Pretty much every living thing that connects to Danny has to also be a ghost for this theory to hold up. I think Hannah just blames everything on ghosts. Hey, where did my other sock go? Ghosts! Hey, they got my order wrong. Ghosts! These ancient civilizations couldn't have built these complex structures by themselves. They're not white. Ghosts! She gets so set on this idea, she starts to have nightmares about Ghost Danny confronting her. This Danny guy might be bad news. The next evening, Hannah decided to see if Danny was home. Maybe he'd like to walk to Harder's and get ice cream cones, she thought. But not bad enough news not to invite for an ice cream social, I guess. You know, I think Mr. Baker might be a demon from hell. Well, let's take him mini-golfing. Hannah goes to Danny's door and gives it a knock, but nobody comes. Peeking in, she sees Danny's mom sitting at the table. There's no reason Danny's mom shouldn't have heard the knocking, but she just does not respond. Like a ghost. So Hannah decides to go to the ice cream parlor by herself. It's already dark, and this is still in the middle of summer, so I guess it's neat that there's an ice cream parlor still open after 10 p.m. You know, that place is just full of stoners at these hours. Hannah arrives just in time to see Danny, Ellen, and Fred run out with stolen ice cream cones. Kids, this town is like 12 blocks, max. Everybody knows everybody. You are not getting away with that. Hannah follows, unseen in the dark, but soon finds herself harassed by the shadow creature again, whispering her name, seeming to try and stop her from interacting with the 3 boys. However, it can't seem to manifest itself for extended periods of time, so it keeps vanishing. Eventually, the boys find themselves outside the house of Mr. Chesney, dog herder, and rightfully decide to bust up his stupid swan mailbox. Chesney catches them in the act and tries to get them, hurting Danny's shoulder in the process, but the boys get away. Hannah finally reveals herself and tries to get some answers out of Danny. Why didn't his mom answer the door? There's a good reason why my mother didn't answer the door, Danny told her. Because she's a ghost, Hannah thought. She felt a cold shiver roll down her back, a tremor of fear. She swallowed hard. Am I afraid of Danny? She asked herself. Yes, a little. She realized. Her scary dream about him flashed into her mind. Yes, a little. You see, Danny started, then hesitated. He cleared his throat. He shifted his weight nervously. You see, my mom is deaf. Huh? Hannah wasn't sure she had heard correctly. It wasn't all what she was expecting. She got an inner ear infection, Danny explained in a low voice, keeping his eyes trained on Hannah. In both ears, a couple of years ago. The doctor treated it, but the infection spread. They thought they could save one ear, but they couldn't. It made her completely deaf. You mean, Hannah stammered, that's why she couldn't hear your knocking, Danny explained. She can't hear anything at all. He lowered his eyes to the ground. Okay. Well, I've got mixed feelings on this. On the positive side, disability representation is nice to see in most cases, and having a character just be deaf is rare. Usually you see people with disabilities in special episodes about accepting people with disabilities, with the disabled characters just disappearing from the fiction once their episode is over. You don't just see a kid in a wheelchair in the background of Saved by the Bell. Having a disabled ancillary character in a story that isn't about disability is, generally speaking, a positive thing. In reality, people with disabilities are living their own lives. They're not here to teach you a lesson about acceptance. That said, it's not great in the fine details. Both Danny and Danny's mother seem to be ashamed by the situation, hiding it so people don't feel sorry for them. I mean, I'm not going to say that there aren't disabled people who feel that way, but the book never offers the counter-suggestion that actually Danny's mom has nothing to be ashamed about. Furthermore, the book ranks being a ghost more likely than being deaf. Hannah never even considers the possibility. Now, you can label that as a fault of the character, not the story, and actually Hannah is kind of an interesting subversion of the horror story protagonist. While most characters in her role would see the strange and supernatural and first assume a rational explanation, Hannah sees things with actual rational explanations and assumes the supernatural. That still doesn't change the fact that the book uses the existence of a deaf woman as a creepy chapter-ending image. Furthermore, it's a weird device, because there's another reason Danny's mom wouldn't have heard Hannah via the twist the book's about to reveal. Narratively, the woman's deafness is a misdirect, one that both discredits the theory of Danny being a ghost while maintaining the secret of what's actually going on. It doesn't feel like something R.L. Stine added to give the book some texture of character, but more like Stine writing himself into a corner and introducing a deaf character to write himself out of it. So let's get to that twist everyone guessed in the first chapter. Some time passes and Hannah and Danny are kicking a ball around, just hanging out, when they accidentally pass through each other. Confused, Danny tries to touch Hannah, but his hand phases right through her. It's at this point that Hannah realizes that no, she was the ghost this entire time. Oh snap, who would have guessed? Hannah is naturally very distraught and disoriented at this revelation, and wanders back home, just in time for Mrs. Quilty to walk by with a neighbor and deliver a crap ton of exposition. How long has it been vacant? The other woman asked. Ever since it was rebuilt, Hannah heard Mrs. Quilty reply. You know, after that dreadful fire. I guess it was 5 years ago. Fire? Mrs. Quilty's friend asked. That was before I moved here. Did the whole house burn down? Pretty much, Mrs. Quilty told her. It was so dreadful, Beth. Such a tragedy. The family trapped inside. Such a beautiful family. A young girl, 2 little boys. They all died that night. My dream, Hannah thought, gripping the tree trunk to hold herself up. It wasn't a dream. It was a real fire. I really died that night. Tears streamed down Hannah's face. Her legs felt weak and trembly. She leaned against the rough bark of the tree and listened. How did it happen? Beth, Mrs. Quilty's friend asked. Do they know who started the fire? Yes, the kids had some kind of campfire out back, behind the garage, Mrs. Quilty continued. When they went inside, they didn't put it out completely. The house caught fire after they'd gone to sleep. It spread so quickly. So not only did Hannah die, she died from a fire she accidentally caused. And not only did she die, her entire family died. And her ghostly form has manifested itself 5 years later. That is, well, that's very heavy. Perhaps heavier than this author and this series are equipped to manage. Actually, this is a pretty common setup for a ghost story. A restless spirit dealing with trauma and guilt, seeking to redeem their actions in life. And that does kind of play out here. Skipping ahead, Danny and his 2 friends go back to terrorize Chesney's house, and in the process accidentally light it on fire. Danny ends up trapped inside, and Hannah, realizing she's unable to be harmed, runs in to save him. It's a pretty clear redemption arc. I accidentally killed people in a fire, now I'll have to save a person from a fire. Except the book never really acknowledges this connection. Hannah thinks she might have come back with the purpose of saving Danny, but she never connects the 2 house fires or even really feels guilty about the death she inadvertently caused, just angst over being dead. Clearly you can still make these connections, but the book feels uninterested in actually engaging with its own implications. I know, it's Goosebumps, it's 4th grade schlock, but this doesn't feel like a Goosebumps book. It's slow-paced, it lacks any real end-of-chapter cheap-out scares, and most of the book is Hannah sitting around thinking to herself, trying to figure out what's going on. Since the book's twist is so obvious to the point where I think it was intentional, the story feels achingly melancholic. The story around her, her home, her messy room, her family, these are projections she has created because she can't come to grips with her reality as a lost soul. She opens the book blissfully happy that she is not dead, which we know is a lie. The summer season acts as a sort of metaphorical limbo state for Hannah. She thinks she's isolated from her friends when in fact she's isolated from everybody but Danny. Sure, she's free to wander her town, but she's incapable of interacting with it in a meaningful way. The book spends a lot of time talking about light and sound, that the sunlight is a bit too bright, the shadows a bit too dark, that where there should have been sounds, there's silence instead, taking this familiar landscape and making it just a little bit alien. Hannah no longer belongs here, but she has nowhere else to go. And then there's the shadow figure that's been stalking and calling to Hannah. My initial thought was that this was some kind of Grim Reaper figure, trying to usher her into the afterlife, or perhaps a guardian force trying to guide her into what to do. While trying to save Danny from the fire, it finally reveals itself. The darkness that cloaked its face fell away, and beneath the darkness, Danny's face was revealed. Hannah stared in horror and disbelief, struggling to breathe. The sour odor choked her. The darkness continued to wrap around her, holding her prisoner. Danny grinned back at her, with the same glowing red eyes as before he'd been unmasked. A cruel smile played over the figure's glowing face. I am Danny's ghost. When he dies in the fire, I will no longer be a shadow. I will be born, and Danny will go to the shadow world in my place. Oh, hey, some nonsense. Now it feels like a Goosebumps book. This element comes so late and is so unexplored that it could be anything. Does this afterlife system in the book have a ping-pong reincarnation system, where when one person dies, another gets reincarnated, and when that second person dies, the original person is reincarnated? Which means that Danny's phantom... Oh, god damn it. Which means that Danny's ghost thing is just really impatient to have another go at it? Or maybe this is the same kind of shadow people from Let's Get Invisible, trying to replace people in our world? Once Danny dies, maybe this shadow Danny possesses his body and takes over his life? The truth is, the book doesn't care what Danny's ghost thing actually is. It just wants an antagonistic force to provide capital P proper scares. As creepy as the shadow creature initially is, he does feel dropped in to give the book some threat in a way that makes me wonder if it was something mandated by the publisher. What's this? A slow and meditative book about dealing with death? Oh, that won't sell. Throw in a monster. It doesn't fit. All it does is make us scratch our heads over this book's implied theology. And Hannah doesn't really have to do anything to stop this being. She just saves Danny from the fire, and that puts a stop to its plans. This book is okay, which for Goosebumps is exceptional. However, it feels like it could have been great if R.L. Stine and or Scholastics held back on their instincts and embraced the more thoughtful idea space this kind of ghost story allows, about worrying less about giving kids the spooks and instead focusing on themes of regret and redemption. There's a skeleton of a great book here that's just not a lot of meat. Hannah is definitely in the column of likable Goosebumps protagonists. She has a general positive outlook and has a good relationship with Danny on top of saving the day through brave acts instead of ironic happenstance. In many ways, a book that's almost there is more frustrating than the book that never had a chance. Welcome to Dead House, Goosebumps' previous ghost adventure, feels more whole because it never tried to be anything more than schlocky garbage. This one feels like a book with some actual ideas in mind, but it didn't really know how to execute these ideas to their fullest. I give The Ghost Next Door a jar of nickels out of 10.